Okay, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at a distribution that quite a few of you have asked me to check out, including the developer himself, but I've just never quite got around to it until today, and that distribution is XeroLinux, which is an Arch-based distribution with a focus on iCandy. Now, yesterday I actually did attempt to record a video of this, but the ISO just kept failing on the installer. But fortunately, I did message the developer himself, and he said they've already applied a fix and they've got a new ISO out, so hopefully we should be all good to go. So as we know, it's an Arch-based distribution, which originally just kind of started as like a personal passion project, but then as they further developed it, they decided to share it with the rest of the Linux community. Now it comes in two flavors, which are their main version of KDE, which is their flagship, and then they have XFCE, which is intended to be more lightweight. Now they did have a GNOME version, which does appear to have since been discontinued. Now I know KDE is their main version, but I'm quite intrigued to actually check out the XFCE version, so that's the version we're going to take a look at today. I've already downloaded the ISO, which is almost about 2.5 gig in size. What we'll do, we'll read a little bit from the release notes, and then we'll jump straight into it and get this installed. Alright, so what is the XFCE edition? It was created for all of you out there that don't have powerful enough hardware to run the flagship release. It uses tons of effects and other tools. It uses a lot of system resources. And from what I've seen on the internet and some videos here and there, the KDE version does look very heavy, but we will check that out at a later date, but we'll probably use the main rig for that one and switch over the capture cards. But today, XFCE, we should be all good to go with the distro testing machine because we meet the minimum requirements here, which are a Core i3 or AMD equivalent CPU, 2 gig RAM with integrated graphics and 16 gig storage. And then they recommend a Core i7 or AMD equivalent CPU. And quite a large 16 gig RAM, which, you know, most of us have probably got 16 gig RAM these days, but for a Linux distribution featuring XFCE, that's still pretty high. Now, as far as the AUR that's included out of the box, they use Paru as opposed to Yay, so that's all good. And Calamares has been updated to version 3.2.52 with the following fixes. Now, moving on to the Xero XFCE Rice. When it comes to writing, that's where XeroLinux shines, right? We shall soon find out. So for the top panel, they're using a customized polybar, which we can see right here. It's looking pretty decent. And for the dock, they're just going to use Plank, which is probably the best sort of bet if you're using an XFCE environment. So we can see it here. We've got a nice little image of the power menu, which is looking okay, apart from the spacing there is a bit off compared to the one on the left, but we'll check all that out once we are fully installed. Now, as you can see in the screenshot here, we've got some nice little modules, including the sort of net up and down, but that won't be working out of the box until you sort of identify your adapter name and then chuck it in a module. But they have some instructions here, so that's not too much of an issue. Now, they're using Rofi for the app menu search tool, and that is going to be bound to the super key, so that's an interesting approach. But again, we'll see how it all works together once we are fully installed. And I think for the most part, that's pretty much everything. I will leave a link in the description below for you who want to read a bit more. But with that being said, let's jump into the live environment and get this installed. Right, so here we are. Live environment is actually looking pretty nice. It appears that it's using the standard kind of default XFCE wallpaper. So we'll see if it pulls in any additional ones post installation. But if not, we'll just chuck one of our own ones on there. Now, we won't talk too much about the way things are set up until we've actually got it installed onto our machine. So let's start the XeroLinux installer. Okay, so we've just loaded up Calamares, and it does appear that they've changed the image from the little trial run that we did yesterday when it kept failing. So we now have a welcome fellow Linux nerds. Okay, so what we need to do is change our language from American English to the original British English and go to the next step. Okay, so we've got some core components here, which are going to be things like your kernel, your sort of graphics drivers, and all of that good stuff. So insofar as the kernel, I am just going to stick with the default selection of the stock Arch kernel. Now for the processor U-code, we're going all AMD today, so we'll grab the AMD U-code. And then we have the Optimus Manager, which we really won't need because we're not using Intel or NVIDIA, but for those of you that do, it's probably something you're going to want to check in the installation process. We then have the stable LTS kernel, we then have the Intel GPU drivers, and then we have the AMD GPU drivers, which should be the standard sort of XF86. There we go, so that's all we need to get, and then we'll go to the next step, which is power management. So if it was on a laptop, this is something we would definitely be taking a look at. I'll imagine we'll have TLP here, but I'm not sure what else is here. Okay, cool, so TLP is there, we have UPower, and it also includes System 76 power, which is actually quite cool to see included on the sort of core selection here. We then have printing support and then fingerprint driver support, which again we can just completely skip and then get into the package selection. Now, I briefly looked at this on my first trial run, and there is a lot here with different categories, so we'll run through some of it. We won't choose too much because what you choose here will impact the time it takes for this installation to complete. So first up, we have Android and iOS tools. So under Android tools, we have the Android Notifier, we have tools, file transfer, platform tools, Droid Cam, and then we have the screen copy, which is actually quite a cool little sort of application if you use an Android device as well, because you can then mirror your Android device's screen on your Linux desktop, which can come in quite handy. We then have some iOS support tools, which are iFuse and Shotwell. And now for audio and music tools, I guess what we will do is grab a music player, because I don't think one will be included otherwise. So we have things like Amarok, Audacious, Elisa, which is probably my favourite music player on Linux these days, but I'd really only intend to use it on KDE. So I think we'll skip all of those ones for now and then just see what we've got in audio editors. So we have Ardor, Audacity, Glada, K-Wave, and then a digital audio workstation of LMMS, and now in audio converters. Okay, so you've got a few standard sort of converters here, Piano, sound converter, all of that good stuff, and then we have other audio tools. So we have EasyTag, Element, Picard, and Rhythmbox. Probably my least favourite music player, but we will go ahead and grab that just so we do have one included on our base installation. However, that should probably be listed under audio players, just to be a little less confusing to new users. Next up, we have benchmark tools. So we've got the Blender benchmark, Geekbench, GPU test, and then the Phronix test suite. Now for dev studio tools, here's where you're going to find your sort of text editors and all of that good stuff. For the most part, I think all we will grab is just Vim in case we do need to jump into a configuration file and make any changes. So we'll grab Vim and we'll leave the rest, but they've also got Visual Studio Code as well. Okay, disk and USB tools. So we have Brasaro, Etcher, Gparted, RPI Imager, and Ventoy. Never use Ventoy really, but I see a lot of people quite liking it. It's kind of like a way to sort of have multiple ISOs on one bootable USB, which sounds pretty decent in effect, but like I said, never used it. Right, so for the extra fonts, we've got quite a few here, all of the TTF fonts here. And I did notice that when I opened up a terminal, we didn't appear to have the correct fonting here, at least, not that I can see. But I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope that all of the fonts that they use as a standard are included, and we're not going to grab any of the additionals. If we do, though, it's not going to be too hard to add them after the fact. So for graphics studios, we have Blender, Darktable, Digicam, Flameshot, GIMP, which I will grab, and then we have Inkscape and Critter. Now for internet, so I can see that the live environment includes Firefox. I do believe their KDE version uses sort of Vivaldi as a standard. Not a huge fan of Vivaldi, so we will grab an additional one, and let's just see what we've got. So we have things like Opera, Falcon, Epiphany. I'll tell you what, we'll just grab Chromium because we should have Firefox sort of included anyway. So we've got Firefox and then we have an alternative of Chromium. And then that leads us to email clients. We've got Claws Mail, Evolution, Geary, Kmail, Mailspring. I think that's a client that sort of integrates with Microsoft Exchange. And then we have Thunderbird and Trajita, which you'll find in a lot of LXQT distributions. I think for the video, we'll grab Thunderbird and just leave it at that. So for social clients, okay, quite a lot here. So we have Caprine, which I do believe is like a Linux desktop Facebook Messenger application. Again, not something that I would really use, but Discord is one that I do. And if you'd like to join the Tidus Tech Discord server, there'll be a link in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment to this video. And then we also have a few other things here. We've got Jitsi, which is pretty cool. We've got Mumble, Pigeon is a nice multi-protocol chat client, Teams, Telegram, so all of the main ones there. And now for download managers, I haven't used a standalone download sort of manager in a very long time. All I really tend to use is just Transmission and the built-in things of your web browsers. So we will grab Transmission, but they do have a few other things here. So you've got Deluge, Dropbox, FileZilla, Free Download Manager, etc. Now for Office suites, all we're going to really want to get is LibreOffice, but they also have Only and FreeOffice as well as WPS. And the LibreOffice is the fresh package, so that's all good, and we shall grab that. Password managers, again, we're not going to really... Oh, package managers, sorry, password managers is just beneath. Okay, so we've got some additional package managers. So we've got, this one's really cool. So what this is like a multi sort of format package manager GUI, and it even has support for app images. So it will grab them for you. So a very cool little application there. We then have Discover for KDE. We have Flatpak, which we will grab. We then have GNOME Software, and then Octopi, which is again just like a GUI package manager. And then we have password managers. So yeah, you've got most of the main ones here: Bitwarden, KeePass, LastPass. And then we have remote desktops. Again, not something we're going to need for today, but it's got TeamViewer, Remina, RealVNC, Viewer and Server, Parsec. It's interesting to see that there, and No Machine. So for terminal emulators, again, it should just go ahead and include the standard XFCE terminal, which we can see in the live environment, which is all we're going to need for today. But it's also got some Anacrity as well as the themes, Core Virtual Term, Quake, RxVT, and Terminator. Now for themes and tools, as one of the sort of selling points of this distribution is the quoted eye candy. We're not going to choose to install really any additional themes apart from my favourite, which is the Arc theme, and let's just see what that includes. And that will also grab the Arc icon theme, so I'm happy to leave that one selected. Okay, then we have some various useful utilities. So here we've got things like resource monitors, and let's just see what that's including. So we have BTOP, GoTop, NVTop and VTop. So I imagine it will already have HTOP installed out of the box. It does indeed, and really I only tend to use HTOP as sort of a terminal resource monitor, so I'm not too worried about any of the additional ones. And then we have CPU tools, CLI tools and some system utilities, and now we have the video tools. So hopefully it will just have the tried and tested VLC. It does indeed. But it also has Hypnotics there, which is quite cool to see. So this was introduced in Linux Mint, and it's a sort of live TV feed player. So for video editors, we have Kdenlive, OBS Studio, OpenShot, Pitifi, I always say that wrong, Shortcut, and then a simple screen recorder. So I edit on Kdenlive, but if I'm not using a KDE desktop, I kind of just prefer to use an app image or a Flatpak. So we won't grab that as a native application, but it's good to see it there. So video converters, again, most of the sort of common ones there. So we've got Handbrake, and now for other video tools. Okay, and then we have the last two categories of VirtualBox, and then I'll just grab VirtualBox, including the sort of host DKMS and guest ISO, as well as the VNC extension there. And then we have Wine all-in-one. So again, not going to really be needing those for today's video. So I think that should see us all good for our base installation. But a good selection of different packages there, and it is good to give the user the sort of choice and freedom to choose what they want included. So I do like this kind of approach on distributions, and distributions like this, and Calamaris makes it very easy to do. Next up we have a location, so it's grabbed the correct one for me, which is Europe and London. And then we have our keyboard layout of UK, and let's just make sure our keyboard is behaving itself and then go to the next step. Okay. So it should already have an existing failed XeroLinux installation there. So it did actually partition the drive. So we might have actually been able to boot that. But what we will do is do an erase disk. And now we're going to go for swap with Hibernate, because I always like to test out the hibernation. And then we're going to use Btrfs as our file system. Now I'm not sure how it's going to set up the sort of Btrfs subvolumes, but we will test it out with something like Timeshift to see if it will work that way of doing the snapshots. And that will give us 3 partitions, one for our EFI, one for our swap partition, large enough to suspend to disk with full hibernation, and then the rest is all going to be assigned to our root partition with our selection of Btrfs as our file system. Okay, user account time. So we're just going to call this one Zero Boy. There we go, living the dream. We've got an I where we don't need one. And now let's type in our password. Now, usually I would log in automatically, but I kind of want to see if they've done anything with the login screen. So all we're going to do is just check this one to use the same password as the administrator account. Okay, so now we've got a summary to make sure we've chosen all of the stuff that we need, and we can now commit to an install. So this is where we got last time yesterday before the installer crashed. So fingers crossed we'll be all good. So I'll pause the video here and come back once it's finished. Right, so I'll quickly show you the Grub bootloader, which has been customized. It doesn't look too bad actually. So what we're going to do is now just jump straight into it and boot up XeroLinux. And here we are at the login screen. So it's using LightDM, and it's quite nicely themed with a nice little background there. So it's all looking pretty good. And I'm imagining that's inheriting the background from the desktop, so we'll soon find out. Let's log in. Right, here we are. So it appears that by default it's given us just a solid color as the background. So let's just quickly change that so it doesn't look a bit too boring on the desktop, and then we'll start running through things. Yeah, so it's just using a solid color there. So let's just go into the backgrounds folder and see if there's anything to select. There is not. Okay, bear with me. We'll get a little wallpaper just so I'm not looking at a blank screen. Okay, we've got a wallpaper now, so it doesn't look as plain, so we should be good to go. If anyone wants that wallpaper, it's just one of the sort of default wallpapers from Fedora 29, one of my favorite kind of default Linux wallpapers. Anyway, let's start with the XeroLinux configuration tool. So use this tool to configure your system, or recall it with sysconfig. So we've got a NVIDIA card checker, we have a shell configuration, so what's this going to go ahead and do? So using this tool we can configure our shell to switch to ZSH or revert back to default bash. Quite cool to have that there, nice and easy way to switch your default shell. I tend to just stick with bash, so it's not something that I would really use. We have a button there to configure our Samba shares, we have NVIDIA legacy drivers, we have a check for system updates. So we've got our little notify here in the Pacman tray, but I think what we'll do is we will check for system updates and we'll see how it handles it. So it's just going to open up a terminal, which will then ask you for your sudo password, and then that's going to go ahead and update you there. And then we can see we've got the XeroLinux repo and XeroLinux repo X1. Okay, we're going to start that update again because I think it had a bit of an issue there, but now you can see it's putting in all of the additional repos there. And there we go, so we should be all good and up to date. And as we can see, the little icon there has changed. So we are now fully up to date and good to go. So what else do we have? We have coming soon on June 6th. Is that just going to open up a web browser? Nope, so that's just a button that will be doing something, but it does nothing at the moment. Okay, so I think what we can do then, we also have installed KVM and QEMU as well for virtual machines. So I think what we can do now is just disable that auto start entirely to stop it popping up when we first start up our machine. And now before we start taking a look around and make any changes to our system, I am quite intrigued to see how much RAM this uses on a fresh boot. So we do have htop installed out of the box, and as we can see, it has also pulled in all of the correct look now, and actually does look quite nice. So we'll pause the video here, reboot, check RAM, and then we'll start playing around with things. Okay, so we've just done a fresh boot and we can now see how much RAM we're using from the output of htop. So we can see there it's using 602 MB on a fresh boot, which, you know, isn't amazing for XFCE, but it's pretty standard. And when you consider that this is, you know, purpose to have nice eye candy and sort of effects out of the box, I probably would have expected that to be a little bit higher. So I'm not too worried about that whatsoever. And it's actually just dropped down below 600 now at 590. And we can see there our large enough swap that we will be testing with hibernation towards the end of the video. So we can now close that, and while we've got our little sort of NeoFetch here, we can have a quick look at what we've got. So we're using the 5.16.11 XFCE 4.16, and we've got Bash 5.1.16, and we're using the Ant Dracula theme there, and we have a total of 1,214 Pacman packages. Of course, we could have had more or less depending on what we chose in the installation screen. Okay. Personally, I don't actually like having this open up every time I open up a terminal, so what I'd probably do is just remove the sort of NeoFetch command in the bash RC, but we won't worry about that just this minute. Right, desktop wires, let's have a little look at what we've got then. So we have a nice little plank dock at the bottom here, which has got icon zoom enabled out of the box, and let's just see the theming that we are using. So we've got a Zero Poly dock. Wow, okay, and there's actually a whole lot of themes included out of the box. Yeah, loads. It seems like this is almost never ending. Jesus, that is a lot of themes included out of the box just for the dock itself. So quite impressive that they've got all of them included there. And they even have the sort of the Mac OS ones for you that like having a sort of Mac OS inspired aesthetic. Okay. And now let's close that off, and now on a right click on our desktop, let's see if they've done anything here. So you've got the standard sort of stuff for our desktop icons, and then we have the applications to the right hand side there, so we can go through all of the applications as well. Now at the top we have our sort of poly bar, which is separated into 3 segments. Usually I'm not a huge fan of the way this is done, because you can notice there's a lot of sort of spacing and gapping in between, which does look very nice when you're just looking at a desktop with no sort of application windows interacting with it. But I often find, and of course Funa is your default file manager, and they've sort of opted to show hidden files by default. Yeah, so usually that looks really nice there, especially with the transparency on the title bar of the actual application window. But I always find when you maximize an application, there's just a lot of wasted space all around here, which isn't something I'm a huge fan of. I tend to like to keep my top bars very slim and sort of utilize all the space on the screen that we can there, and just the gapping in between does make that just a very large kind of dead zone where you can't really do anything with, but it does look very nice when there's no application there interacting with it. Now let's start with the top left. So we have a start button. Okay, so that's opening up like a drop down menu, looks like something like JG menu or something. So we'll go through the applications in just a moment, and then we have some nice categories there with some nice transparent effects. And then we have our virtual desktop switching. So we've got quite a few there, and of course the sort of solid color will then signify what workspace you're actually on, and then when they're hollow, they are workspaces that you can go to. Now, I don't know what the sort of keyboard shortcuts are out of the box. So let's have a little test of just Control Alt and then use our directional keys. There we go. So if you look at the dot, it's now moving about, and we can make that a bit more obvious when we've got an actual application open. There we go. So it switches between desktops, either just using the buttons here, or you can use Control Alt and then directional keys, of which you can change it with your keyboard shortcuts if you prefer. Now central, we've got our clock here, and we also have what appears to be a nice little module for sort of the weather. Now there is another module for the up and down that we might get to towards the end, but at the moment I actually think it's quite nice with just those two there. Now on the right hand side we have got a sort of update there for our PacMac GUI, so we can open that up. What font is this? I'm not sure I like the font, it's quite blocky. I've seen it on a lot of Arch based distros though. We'll go into the fonts in just a moment. And while we are here, let's go into the preferences and see what they have enabled out of the box here insofar as the AUR. So if we go on to third party, so AUR support is there and ready to go, so we could enable that. And then we have the Flatpak support there as well as the snaps support. I'd usually just stick to one of Flatpaks and then also use app images. So let's close that off. And now let's see what else we've got. So we have our clipboard there, and then we have our connection, and then we have a volume. So just the standard click on that is going to mute and unmute. And let's see if my keyboard shortcuts are working with that as well. Don't appear to. Okay. And we've got notifications, so we can click that to disable or pause, and then click it again to resume. Okay, now using the left super, it's going to open up the Rofi menu here. So we've got a nice little search bar at the top, and then we've got all of our applications spread across there, and then we can use sort of like our scroll button to go through them like so as well. Okay, not bad. Actually, no, I don't mind that. It doesn't look too bad at all. And let's just test out the search. So let's open up something like Thunderbird, hit enter, boom, that'll then go ahead and launch an application for you. Okay, I do actually think the theming does work nicely together. I do like the sort of transparency effects that they've gone for on the title bars there. So let's close that off and keep it moving. Now there was one thing that I saw in the screenshot that I was hoping would be sorted, and it does appear to. So in the screenshot I saw, this button here was very far to the right and it just was off center and it looked a bit janky, but here now it actually looks quite nice. And I do like the fact that we can see our system uptime there as well, showing us that we have been up for 6 minutes since we last rebooted. So we have our power button, we have our reboot button, I'm going to imagine, lock screen, and that's either going to be like sleep or sort of hibernate, and then we have log out. Now let's quickly test what happens here. Usually with these power menus, you'll sort of double click or hit enter, and then it will say, are you sure, of which we could put Y, but this time we're going to put N because we don't want to shut down just yet. Of course, we will be testing out hibernation in just a moment. In fact, is that just a standard sleep? I'm going to imagine that is, so we might invoke hibernation using the terminal instead of using a GUI, because I've got a feeling that's just going to sleep our session. Okay. Not too bad. Now let's see how it handles sort of window splitting. We should just be able to drag to the left, and then if we keep going, it will be on a cycle and it will go through all of your workspaces until it cycles back to the first one. But if you just gently drag it to the left or right hand side, it will then split. And let's see if we've got a four-way split. We do indeed. So all of the splitting is working. I'm going to imagine because the left super is bound to the sort of rotary menu here, it's not going to be working for things like snapping. Yeah, see, as soon as you press the super key and press other keys, it's just going to sort of remain on there. So we might have to do something in order to enable sort of shortcuts for snapping left and right, because I do like to use sort of your left super and then your directional keys to actually split them, as opposed to always dragging and dropping things. Now let's see, if we drag it to the top, it should maximize. Perfect, it does indeed. So every sort of thing is working as one would expect for the sort of way XFCE will handle your sort of Windows snapping, so that's not too much of an issue. Right, let's see what applications we've got. So bearing in mind we did include some ourselves in the installation screen, so we are going to go over that, but we're mainly going to be focusing on the core packages that are included on this install. So in accessories we have Kvantum Manager, we have LibreOffice, which we installed ourselves, we have Notes, which will be just your desktop kind of sticky notes there, and that is working with the sort of system tray indicator there as well. So of course just clicking that will then open them bad boys back up. Anything else interesting of note? We have Synapse, okay. We have the XeroLinux system tool, which is what we saw when we first started up. What else have we got in accessories? Can I see what our default GUI text editor is? Would it be in accessories? Notes, calculator for calendar, terminal emulator, task manager. Let's have a look at the task manager. Pretty standard stuff. So what is our text editor? Okay, so we've got one text editor there of Genie, so not like any slim sort of things like Mousepad or Z or anything like that. Okay, so that's accessories. Let's have a look at development. Now, we didn't really choose any additional development tools, so I don't expect that we're going to see a lot hidden here. But there we go. We have the IDE of Genie, Icon Browser, Meld, and SysProf. Now, in education, we just have LibreOffice, which we chose to install ourselves. I will test out Writer to see if dictionary support's working out the box, or whether we've got to sort of manually install the dictionary ourselves. And we have Restriso, Image Viewer, again LibreOffice Draw, and then GIMP, which we chose to install ourselves. Now for multimedia, we've got the Pulse Audio Volume Control, the V4L2 Test and Capture utilities, and then we have the two sort of media players that we chose to install with the Music Player Rhythm Box, which again, not a huge fan of, but I just thought it'd be worth having one included. And then of course we do also have a VLC. Now for internet, let's have a little look what we've got here. So we have the SSH and VNC server browsers. We have Chromium, which we chose to install ourselves. So let's just quickly see how that looks with the overall aesthetic of the rest of the desktop. Not bad. I've not really used the Ant Dracula themes too much, but I think the sort of the purple with the dark sort of colour shades there does work quite well. Again, still not a fan of the sort of wasted space at the top there, but that might just be a personal weird thing that I have, like an OCD of sort of screen space. Okay, let's see what else we've got in internet. Discord, which we chose to install ourselves, Firefox being our default web browser, and then we have Mail Reader, but this will just be a shortcut that XFCE does to open up your default email client, which we have got, of course, Thunderbird, which we chose in the installation, and that's registered it all to work as the default email client, so that's not an issue. We then have our shared folders, transmission, and again, web browser, just another XFCE thing where it sort of puts this link there, and then that will link to your default web browser. So we could choose to use Chromium as opposed to Firefox, but Firefox is pretty much my main web browser, so we don't need to change anything there. And now in Office, so we have our full fresh suite of LibreOffice applications, and now let's test out if we've got dictionary support working out of the box. Bearing in mind this was an additional application that we chose to install, but we shall see. We don't. So if you go into the tools here, you'll notice that it will be enabled for automatic spell checking, but you're just going to go ahead and sort of set up the dictionary yourself so it actually knows what words to check against and check if they're correct, basically. Okay, let's close that off. So that's everything in Office, and then we have settings, which for the most part is going to be a whole lot of XFCE stuff, but let's see if there's any additional stuff here that we wouldn't usually see. So Kvantum, like we've just mentioned. Okay, all seems pretty standard stuff here for the most part. And now in System, let's see what we do have. Again, pretty standard stuff. We do have GM Run there. JG menu, so the application menu, as I thought. Yeah, pretty standard stuff. We also have the Valor panel there, the Valor paneling system. Interesting. Okay, right. I think what I want to do is see if the ButterFS sort of sub-volumes are set up to work with time shift, because I do remember, I don't know if this is the case on this KDE version, but they do include like the auto snapping feature enabled with time shift from the AUR. So I'm going to imagine that the sub-volume should be set up to work. We shall soon find out. Okay, so it's actually going to be pulling the time shift from the XeroLinux repo, which I do think is quite heavily entwined with XeroLinux. I think originally it sort of span off from XeroLinux and then led into its own thing. So let's go ahead and proceed with the installation of timeshift. Okay, so timeshift has now been installed. So we're going to open up our menu here and then just see if it will work with ButterFS snapshots out of the box. It looks promising, so it's found ButterFS there. So let's press next, next once more, and finish. Okay, so let's go ahead and create one. Perfect, so it's going to work all with the sort of snapshotting there, and if we wanted to, we could download the auto snapshot package as well. I don't think it's included on the base install, but it could be, and then that will take an automatic snapshot for us every time we sort of do an update or an upgrade to our system, which is how I always handle my sort of ButterFS snapshots these days. Just makes my life a lot easier knowing if anything breaks, especially on an Arch-based distro, I can just go back, hold any packages that I might need that might be interfering with things while I wait for an update or a fix. Cool, so not to worry with that. Now, insofar as theming, we know that we're using the Ant Dracula, but do we have any additionals apart from the optional one of Arc that we had chose to install ourselves? So we've got the Ant Dracula there, and it also has the standard Adwater as well as Adwater Darks. And then, yeah, we've just got the sort of additional theme that we chose to install of Arc there. And I guess the same will apply for the icons. It does indeed. So the icons here look quite similar to sort of the Tellus Circle. I don't know if that's where Dracula sort of bases it from. And then for the fonts, the default font that we are using, yeah, is JetBrains Mono, and then just a monospace regular. Probably not my favourite font, but again, very easy to change. Now, there's a couple more things I want to check out before we do our hibernation test. So I know it includes the standard AMD GPU graphics drivers, so we're just going to do a quick screen tearing test to make sure it's all been set up and working as one would expect. So if it wasn't working, there would be breaks in these lines, but that's all very nice and smooth. So screen tearing is working absolutely, there's no issues with it. So all of the AMD GPU drivers have been installed correctly, which were the ones that we chose in the installation. So that's all been handled correctly. Now, I know that they have taken a bit of inspiration again once more from Arco and do include a lot of sort of aliases out of the box. So let's just see which aliases we have. So we're just going to type in alias and see what it gives us. Okay, yeah, quite a lot. So we'll have a look at a couple of these. Oh, cool. So it's also got some ButterFS aliases there. Have we got any simple kind of update aliases or anything? Got the mirrorless there to sort of go in, so it's using Nano there. Obviously I'm a Vim user, so if I wanted to, I would change that to Vim to then open the mirrorless up. What else have we got? Probe. Reloading of your bashrc file, which is of course just source. What else? SMB conf, so again, if you're not a huge fan of Nano, you'll probably want to go through these and change it over to whatever text editor you prefer. But it is cool to see that there are these aliases here to make things a bit easier for users that are not super terminal centric and just want to type a couple of characters and let your computer go away and do its thing. Got one here for Light DM, so what's that going to do? Pseudo Pacman, Light DM greeter. Okay, not too bad. We've got some simple updates here. So we've got update, so a standard update will just go ahead and issue the Pacman update command. And then we have updb, so that's going to go ahead and do paru, so with the AUI helper. And then that's going to go ahead and again issue a Pacman update command. Pretty cool. Okay, so some fairly sort of useful aliases there. So let's clear this all off. Right, so I think what we'll do then, we're going to go ahead and test out hibernation and see if that is working. So what we'll do, we'll open up a few applications now, and we want all of these to remain on the screen as we're hibernating, and when it's resuming, all of these need to still be there to show that they've suspended into the disk properly and you're good to go. So I don't think this button is going to work for hibernation. I think that's just going to issue a standard sleep command, so we won't risk it for now, and we're just going to go ahead and issue the command here for hibernating the actual terminal itself. So we're going to go system ctl hibernate. Super simple. Now, like I said, once we hit enter, it's going to go into a low powered state, nearly completely off, and then when we restart the computer, it's going to sort of come back to exactly the point where we've left it. So I'll hit enter, and here's where we'll pause the video. Okay, we're just starting back up now, and like I said, all of those applications need to be on the screen right where we left them for us to know that hibernation has worked. And it will usually start you on a lock screen, you'll log in, and then it will let you know that hibernation has worked. So we shall see. We'll give it another try if it hasn't worked after this time before we sort of say categorically that it hasn't worked on my machine. It doesn't mean it won't work on anyone else's. Okay, so it's a good sign. It started us off at the lock screen, which has inherited our desktop wallpaper. Got a bit of a black bar at the bottom here, but we won't worry about that for the moment. So let's type in our password. And boom, we are back right where we left them, and all of the applications have worked. So I think that is about where we're going to wrap things up before we give some final thoughts of the distribution. But everything that we've tested out today so far has worked, and we haven't really experienced any issues or sort of bugginess, so I'm pretty happy with what we've done today so far. Right, so that was our first look at XeroLinux, this time featuring their XFCE edition. I will, in a few days or maybe a week or so, check out their KDE edition as well. I will have to move some things around because I don't think this distro testing machine would be the best best machine to show off that distro, because there's a lot more things going on. You're going to want a bit more of a powerful machine, so I'll chuck the capture card into the machine we're on now, and hopefully we'll be all good. But for the XFCE edition, I actually quite like it, to be honest with you. Again, there's some design choices that I would probably make a little bit different, but I think all in all, using Polybar as the kind of paneling system in conjunction with Plank as your dock at the bottom there does make for a nice cohesive experience. And I do like the fact that the theming it does match quite well. So the default dock theme here does match, and if I remember, I think it might be one of their own themes as well, which if it is, send me a link, because I do quite like that theme. I'll use it on my own XFCE desktops. I like the fact that it's all set up to work with Btrfs snapshotting the time shift out of the box. We had no issues with the GPU drivers that we chose to install, and actually quite like the whole installation process in its entirety, although we did have some issues with it yesterday with the installer keep crashing, but developer was very quick to respond and then sort of issue a fix and refresh his ISO so everyone could then reload it and not have any issues there. So I think all in all, decent distro, and I'll be quite excited to see sort of as it further develops where it goes in the future. I think what you should probably do is just leave the GNOME one. Don't worry about sort of revitalizing it. So I know they've discontinued it. Stick with your main one of your KDE, and yeah, have another option like XFCE as your lightweight alternative for people that can't quite, you know, manage to power the KDE version smoothly on their own machines. And don't spread yourself too thin. You're doing a good job here. Right, so that's XeroLinux out of the way. So I know I've been a bit dormant these past few weeks while I've sort of been settling into a new job, but we're going to get back to sort of a couple of videos a week now. I'm determined to do it, and there's a little series that I want to do in conjunction with the distro review sort of checkouts that we do. So each time we do a distro video like today, in the sort of following days, what I want to do is then speak to the main developers or developers on the team behind it for a short little 30-minute interview, and I'll chuck that onto the Patreon, but that will only be a Patreon exclusive for like a week. It will then go onto the main channel. I don't want anything to be sort of paywalled. I want everyone to be able to watch things, but just a little incentive for those of you who do want to join the Patreon helps me. So I'll, you know, chuck those little interviews on there first before they do reach the main channel. That is where we're going to wrap up. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, you can consider supporting me on Patreon. There'll be a link down below. Also, join the Discord server. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff with the Discord server in future videos. Again, there'll be links to that in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.